The courtroom was packed, tension hanging in the air like smoke from a fire. It wasn't just another trial, it was his trial. Sergeant Marcus Johnson, a decorated Navy SEAL who had seen and survived horrors most couldn't fathom. He had come home to find peace, but the justice system had other plans. The charges against him were serious: assault, resisting arrest, and public disturbance. All of it stemmed from one unfortunate incident in a local park, where an altercation with an officer had escalated. Something that had started as a misunderstanding and quickly spiraled into a chaotic scene. Johnson had done what he thought was necessary to protect himself, but the officer on the scene, Officer Jake Harris, felt differently. Johnson had been charged, but he wasn't just a veteran to the system. He was a black man, and as his lawyer, Rachel Monroe, would argue, that had made all the difference in how the encounter was treated. The real question wasn't whether or not the arrest was just. It was whether the system would give a man like Marcus Johnson, a former soldier who had served his country with honor, the justice he deserved. In the courtroom, Johnson sat, his hands folded in front of him, wearing the suit he was instructed to wear. His posture was rigid, reflecting the discipline he had learned over his years of service, even if it felt foreign to him now. He wasn't used to being on the defensive, but this was different. This wasn't the battlefield. This wasn't an enemy he could fight with his fists. It was a waiting game, and the longer it went on, the more the emotions built inside him. He could feel his blood pressure rising, but he held back. He wasn't going to snap. Not this time. Not here. And then it happened. Officer Jake Harris walked in, his presence as heavy as it had been the day of the arrest. Harris was a big man, his frame imposing in uniform, but there was an arrogance in the way he carried himself. He knew he was untouchable. The system had always protected him. Harris took his seat on the witness stand, and the room went silent. The judge, a stern woman with a reputation for fairness, looked down at Harris with a neutral expression. She knew the significance of this trial. The eyes of the public were watching, waiting to see if the scales of justice would tip in favor of someone who had served his country, or if the system would fail him, as it had so many others. The moment Harris began to speak, the air in the room thickened. He started with his version of the events that led to Johnson's arrest. His voice was smooth, calculated, and rehearsed. He painted a picture of Marcus as the aggressor, claiming that Johnson had attacked him without provocation, that he had been forced to act in self-defense. Harris didn't mention the racial undertones of the incident, or the fact that Johnson had been outnumbered by Harris and his colleagues when they approached him. Rachel Monroe leaned forward, her voice calm but filled with a quiet fury. "Officer Harris," she said, "is it true that Marcus Johnson never struck you first?" Harris's eyes narrowed. He clearly wasn't prepared for the question. He tried to resist arrest. That's what I'm trained to handle. He didn't comply." Rachel pressed further. "And was that the only reason you escalated the situation to physical violence?" Harris hesitated. "No, but nothing," Rachel interrupted. "You assaulted a man who was serving his country. You humiliated him in front of his neighbors and his children." The tension in the room was palpable. Marcus could feel the heat rising, the fire that had been smoldering inside him threatening to burst. He clenched his fists, but he held his ground. This was his moment. But it felt like he was losing control. Then, out of nowhere, Harris stood up. His body stiffened, and with a swift movement, he walked toward Marcus. His voice rose, becoming louder, almost snarling. "You think I'm scared of you, Navy boy?" Harris spat. "You're nothing but a thug, just like the rest of them." Before anyone could react, Harris lunged at Marcus. The courtroom gasped as Harris pushed Marcus back into his chair and kicked him hard in the chest. The sound of Harris's boot striking Marcus was deafening. It reverberated through the courtroom like a gunshot, and in that moment, everything stopped. The officers in the room hesitated, unsure of what to do. The judge slammed her gavel down. "Officer Harris, what the hell do you think you're doing?" she shouted, but the damage had already been done. Marcus Johnson didn't flinch. Instead, his training kicked in. In a split second, he sprang to his feet, his body moving faster than anyone could anticipate. Before anyone could stop him, he grabbed Harris by the collar and threw him to the floor with one swift motion. The courtroom erupted into chaos. The room erupted in chaos. The force of Marcus Johnson's response had taken everyone by surprise. Officer Harris, who had been standing tall moments earlier, was now sprawled across the floor, gasping for air. His arrogance had transformed into utter disbelief. "Get him off of him!" one of the officers shouted, rushing toward Marcus. But it was too late. Marcus, fueled by the rage of years of mistreatment, stood over Harris, his chest heaving, his face filled with an intensity that stunned everyone in the room. "Don't you ever put your hands on me again," Marcus growled. His voice was cold, but it carried a weight that none of the officers could ignore. The courtroom descended into complete chaos. The judge's gavel rang out again and again, trying to restore order, but it was clear that no one was listening. The moment Harris had crossed the line, everything changed. Marcus wasn't just defending himself. He was making a statement. The other officers had rushed to Harris's aid, pulling him away from Marcus. The judge, still in shock, tried to regain control of the room. "Order! Order in the court!" she yelled, but the tension had already cracked through the facade of the legal system. Rachel Monroe, Marcus's lawyer, stood, her face a mix of fury and disbelief. She was the first to step forward, placing herself between the officers and Marcus. "You will not arrest him for defending himself," she said, her voice sharp and unwavering. "This man is a decorated Navy SEAL, and you," she pointed to Harris, "you have no right to lay a hand on him." The officers paused, looking at each other. They knew the power dynamics had shifted. They knew they couldn't simply walk over Marcus anymore. Not after what had just happened. "Don't make this worse, officer," Rachel continued, locking eyes with Harris, who was slowly getting to his feet, his expression one of shame and confusion. "You crossed the line. You physically assaulted him in front of a courtroom of witnesses. Now it's your turn to answer for that." But Harris wasn't ready to back down. Blood was still trickling down from his lip, and his pride had taken a severe blow. He was about to retort when Marcus, still standing tall and unwavering, spoke up. "You don't get to walk away from this, Harris," Marcus said, his voice cold but measured. "You've been abusing your power for far too long. This isn't just about me. It's about everyone you've hurt with your actions. You're not untouchable anymore." The words hit like a hammer. For the first time, Harris saw the man he had tried to subjugate, the man who had every right to retaliate, but had chosen not to until this moment. Harris's breath quickened, and for the first time he wasn't just scared of a punch. He was scared of the truth. As the courtroom cleared, tension still hung heavy in the air. Marcus, his chest still rising and falling from the adrenaline, was led to a back room where the officers who had been involved in the scuffle started to file reports. But Marcus wasn't worried about the reports. He knew this was bigger than anything paperwork could handle. The press would be all over the story. The video footage of the courtroom incident would be shared across the world. The public would see everything, the assault, the retaliation, and the powerful defense of a man who had been pushed too far. In that moment, Marcus realized something that would stay with him forever. Justice doesn't always come from the law. Sometimes it comes from standing your ground. Outside, the media was already gathering. The headlines were being written before the full facts were even known. Black Navy SEAL strikes back at racist cop. But Marcus wasn't interested in the headlines. He was focused on one thing: taking down the system that allowed men like Harris to exist with impunity. This wasn't just a fight for himself. It was a fight for every person who had ever been mistreated, ignored, or silenced by the very people sworn to protect them. As Marcus walked out of the courthouse, he didn't look back. He had made his stand, and he knew the world would soon be watching. The next few days brought a whirlwind of events. Officer Harris was suspended pending an investigation, and his career began to unravel as the details of his misconduct were brought to light. The video of his assault on Marcus was spread across every news outlet. Protests erupted, demanding justice for Marcus and accountability for Harris. But Marcus wasn't looking for revenge. He was seeking justice. He knew this wasn't just about one cop. It was about a system that needed to change. As the investigation into Harris deepened, more officers were questioned about their roles in protecting corrupt behavior. Marcus remained calm, focused on the fight ahead. He wasn't done yet. He wanted the system to feel the weight of the truth, to hold those in power accountable for their actions. In a final hearing, Harris was officially charged with assault, abuse of power, and racial profiling. The courtroom stood in silence as the judge declared his conviction. Marcus had won.